Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Demystifying Books and Records in the Age of AI. I am so excited about our session today. Amber and I have been talking about this for what feels like years, but really a few weeks now. We have so many questions and people in attendance, so I'm going to get through a couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. If I could just go to the next slide. So of course, we're doing introductions and housekeeping. We're going to get into a refresher with Amber of just around books and records in general for anyone who may be state registered and going to SEC or just wants a refresher in general now that AI has been introduced into the mix. Then we're going to get into just AI, like what's the difference between an AI chatbot and an agentic AI agent that performs tasks, and how is that important to compliance team members? And then we're going to get into the questions that everyone's been asking. So we've collected those a lot up front. We have a lot to talk about today with regards to all of the questions about disclosures and Form ADV and all the things. But before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know we are going to have this entire recording available on demand. If you would like, and you are a live session attendee and we have your attendance records, to receive one IACCP continuing education credit, we are giving that out for free. So thank you for being here. Just get in touch with us and we can process that for you. And then we have a lot of prompts today. And so I have a couple of members of my team. I'm going to try and stay focused with Amber because once the two of us get talking, we can't stop, but I believe Caroline and my team is going to be prompting a few questions and engaging. So feel free. We're going to go through all these questions with our team. We're going to bring them to the team that Amber works on, our regulatory consulting team, and help develop more materials or answers for those who are asking those questions. So without further ado, I have said your name about 5 times, but I have not introduced you yet. So before we get into this prompt question, Amber, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the group.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Excited to be here on this topic. And, we'll try to keep it under 5 hours because there's so much to talk about. We're so excited. I'm Amber Tapman. I'm Senior Director in Compliance Advisory, the Partnership Group. I've been here about a dozen years, but in the industry much longer. I won't do math here just to preserve some self-esteem, and which is why this topic is so interesting to me, because we weren't talking about this a couple years ago. The industry's changed so much, and probably never as much as this will change life for all of us. So I'm so excited and looking forward to conversation. I lead an AI working group internally among consultants, so it's something that's top of mind. We're always looking and exploring and trying to find, new use cases and kind of guidelines for people, because as you're going to find out, if you don't know already, the SEC, we don't have finite rules that are specific AI rules. So that requires us to be a little more creative. So excited.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about how excited I am about this conversation, but going back to that chat prompt, I think the most interesting thing right now to me, there's about 5 different things that splinter off, but we're acting like we all know what AI is, right? And so
Right.
my knowledge of AI 365 days ago is dramatically different as personally and professionally. And so when I thought about this prompt question, and I'm sure it's populating in the chat now, it's just what is the challenge? Is it that I don't understand the differences of it? Are you getting granular and you're like, exactly where do I need to report it? It is so different. And it's also, we've brought in, OpenAI, ChatGPT into our organization. I was part of that group and you're on the task force. And so it's how are we leveraging these tools? And then on top of it, how are we teaching people an entirely different way to work, right? And so it's just ripe for a lot of conversations. And then it's also ripe for a lot of risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because
the pace
what are
is
people
going
doing with
so
the thing?
fast, Allison. It's by the time people think they understand it, it's moved on. And I think for a lot of people like my clients that I work with, advisors, let's just say a lot of them are not tech forward, right? They didn't come into this business a million years ago or even recently to be tech experts or AI experts. So it is a bit of a different language for them. So what we try to do is say, okay, we know that it's a fascinating topic and you can dig deep and never come out if you want to explore it. But we're trying to focus on those things that perhaps you need to know, right? At least right now. Because I am always saying and I think you've heard me say this, Allison, that this is such a big change that I think at some point we will be talking about specialized audits in just AI because it's going to be woven into everything advisors do. And we're going to talk today a lot about, some cautionary things. That's what we do. We're in the risk business, so we talk about worst case scenarios a lot. But by no means does that mean we are, or I am anti-AI. I think it's going to change everything, and it should. This is what we need to do. The SEC expects us to implement. They are themselves, right? So it's not at all a negativity. It's just a caution because we're dealing in a space that's quite new, rapid pace of change, and it's new to a lot of people, and we don't have specific rules. So we're just saying, hey, here's some things to think about. But please know, I think everybody is going to have to use AI, and they should. The question is, how do you use it? And, kind of to tee up on your point, Allison, is that I think a lot of firms, one of the things I run into first, just out of the gate, is I'll say, do you use AI in your firm? And I hear a lot from CCOs like, nope. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I feel like you probably are, and let's explore that. And so I may be with in their office and doing a review, talking to some of the people in different areas. Come to find out, yeah, absolutely they are. And I think it's natural that people would be curious. You're going to have tech forward people in some departments that really didn't know they're doing anything wrong, especially if you haven't talked about it yet as a firm and you don't have procedures yet. So they're using it anyway. So I think it's really important to understand that you now really have to analyze, talk to your people and say, okay, what are we using? What are you using? And have an understanding of what's happening now, and ask them, what do you want to use? What
Right.
needs, because if you start saying, oh, this is scary, stay away from it. And I realize as compliance people, that's not unusual. But if we say that, they're going to use it, and then you have no guardrails around it. And once, you miss the boat if it's that far
It becomes,
progressed.
yeah. Sorry, I keep trying to interrupt you, but
No,
it becomes one of these things that it's like maybe compliance isn't using it, but like, why would you ever stop someone who has to run massive things in Excel
right,
from not
right,
using AI to help them with
right.
it if it takes them a minute and it took them 5 hours? So
Absolutely.
that's where we're at with this, right?
It's
It's there's
absolutely,
departments
it's
that need to leverage
efficiency.
it. Yeah.
It's efficiency. And if you do it well, like everybody does better. The firm does better, the clients. It's just
Mhm.
about deciding which tools, and we'll talk about that, how
Yeah.
and being really open-minded, because this is not one that you can sit on the sidelines and say, nope, we're not going to use it. It's too scary. It's just
Hmm.
too big. It's too big. So I think
Yeah.
it's really important. So I appreciate your comments about people that maybe don't know the terminology, because I run into that a lot. And
Yeah.
again, it's a broad area. You don't need to be an expert to know kind of some things, some takeaways, what you need to go back and do in your own office, at least to get started. So
Right.
that's exciting.
Let's segue in. Everyone's favorite topic, books and records
Yes.
requirements.
Yes. People love that.
I would
And,
love if
you
you
know,
can just, and you don't have to read this whole slide to
absolutely.
everyone, but I would love it if you could just take some time.
Right.
Everyone's like diligently reading it. We know these people, but
Right.
let's take some
Right.
time here and walk us through the
Right.
regulatory
And
foundation of this.
we do books and records, webinars regularly, because it is important. It's a list. We know there are a lot of topics, client advisory records, copies of agreements, discretionary accounts, Form ADV, policies and procedures. Finding, I'm not going in order, sorry. The trading records, there's so many. This is just a summary. We have like 5 categories here. But if you go and look at 2042, there's a long list. The thing that's fun to me about this list is it's really indicative of where we are as an SEC framework, right? Because it's principles based. It's not prescriptive rules based. So this is from essentially 1940 with little tweaks here and there. So you're not going to see AI, right? Nothing here is going to say AI. In fact, there's a part that I love. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. The next slide, we're going to talk about retention. in the retention part of this, it talks about microfilm and microfiche. Okay. So I don't know about you, but I have never seen an advisor who's keeping books and records on microfilm or microfiche. And I feel like that was technology, if you could call it that, was like from the 1800s. So it still says that in our rule here. So while we need to follow the rule, I think the idea is not necessarily to get bogged down in specific. We're going to have to apply these principles-based rules to things that were not thought about, in 1940, right? And I hope you're not using microfilm and microfiche, but if you are, I'd love to hear more about that. Hit me up.
Seriously.
But
or when was the last time you used it? Better at that can be in the chat.
I don't even like scary. Although maybe I'm missing something, and we need to know that. The thing about books and records and how it ties into AI, we have the same rule for books and records requirements. That hasn't changed clearly. So AI brings some new kind of points of interest, right? That how we have to use these old rules, apply them to new things to make sure, or try to make sure, that we are consistent with these rules. And again, some of it you don't know until you see it, right, in an exam or otherwise. Some of the ways that things have changed, we have such a volume, velocity, like the movement of records coming out. Like before, think about anything you would generate, right? You have a person probably that is doing a lot of work, and you like, ta-da, here's my spreadsheet or document or paper or letter to a client. Remember those? Like when you actually had to, that took a lot of time. And so you didn't have as many. Now it is conceivable you will have thousands, right, of little bits and pieces you're going to need to not only know about and review, and we'll talk about that, but retain. So that is a big challenge for all of us. We have new and different types of records. We weren't talking about transcripts, a couple years ago. We weren't talking about summaries generated by AI of our conversations a few years ago. We weren't talking about prompts. Okay. This is a new world. And these are things, these different types of records. We're going to have to understand what they are and keep these records, because as we'll see, it's not just important for these record keeping requirements for books and records purposes, 2042, it's important for all of your record keeping purposes. I think those of you who are in compliance and have been for a while will understand that while this is a list of general topics we need to keep, it's not an exhaustive list. You look at your policies and procedures, you look at your disclosures. How many times does it say, we're going to do A, B, and C? We're going to do it this way. You've got to be able to document that you're doing all of those things. Mm-hmm. So our books and records, if you will, rule requirements sometimes overlap with those things. Sometimes they don't. So we're talking about a whole world of items we need to know about and we need to retain beyond what is mentioned in 2042. So I think people should remember that. Other changes here are accuracy, right? These tools are great. And I know you're going to kind of walk us through different types of AI technologies here, because that can be confusing. And we're just kind of all calling it AI, right? The word AI. But, they're great for efficiency and some other things. We definitely should use them. You're going to have people looking at them in a way you didn't before when people were creating them, right? So
yeah, I think I've told you this, but so I mentioned earlier, we have OpenAI, we use ChatGPT, and so I'm a big AI person, and so created custom GPTs, which we'll get into what that means if you're not familiar. But we have the most used custom GPT among the people on the marketing team is what's called the regulatory fact checker. And this one gives me giggles because they're like, oh, we don't have to bother Amber and Ish and Ben and the rest of our regulatory services teams, which is wonderful, right? But then it tells me that AML for investment advisors is still a rule. And if
Yeah.
anyone on
Yeah.
this call is an investment advisor and remembers that that got pushed to 2028,
Yeah. Don't have a
I
heart
get a
attack. It's
nerve
not
bug.
now.
But I also kind of love that it keeps getting it wrong because it keeps me
Yeah.
on my toes
Right.
because like I'm like making sure it's not introducing another rule. So it's one of those
Right.
things that I almost appreciate the hallucination because it keeps me on track.
But you
But
know
the
what's
poor
a,
marketing team, no,
eh,
they're not poor marketing team, but my
right,
colleagues are like,
right.
I'm like constantly, I'm like, make sure the AML
It's
thing is
hard.
correct. And so that's just
That's
one nuisance of a
such a good
thing.
point. And I think it
Yeah, but it's
probably
like,
is the main point here, that I
right,
see, because, you are savvy enough and knowledgeable enough, you're going to recognize when something's not right. I'm
right.
more worried about, because I'll talk to advisors, my clients all the time, that will say, oh, I ran this through whatever tool, right? And sometimes I train them, please ask me, because don't just assume it's right. And,
Yeah.
and oftentimes it's not. Or it's wrong in different ways, but the confidence, the authority with which it gives these inputs, I mean, you would believe it if you didn't know better. And I have seen incorrect sources. It's quoting rules that don't exist. It's quoting sources that don't exist. And now I kind of have my own collection of crazy, outputs that I'm like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And rules, because that's kind of our thing. I've run it by multiple different, just personally before we started looking at this at work to say, okay, I know this answer. If I ask the question of multiple, like, what will it tell me? And about half the time on these, it's been wrong. And so I will go back and say, well, what about this? And it's like, oh, yeah, that's right, Amber. Do you want me to include that in the summary? And I'm like, yes, yes, I do. And it's important to know
Remember
that
this. I'm
because,
like,
right, because it is, I think, people that are maybe not tech people or others, we want to believe that it knows everything because that would be so great and easy, but it is not thinking. It does not know. It is educated, it is trained based on data, right? And it's only as good as the data that it has access to. And then it tries to predict what a response would be based on
Mhm.
your prompt. And the idea that your prompt could maybe not be what you really want and could create a different path. But, one of the things I was shocked about, Allison, when I saw a study that was talking about the sources of information. So when, let's say you go in to just make, for a query of like, tell me about this rule, tell me about whatever. If you're not asking it to do anything, it's not agentic. It's tell me this. And
Yeah.
the common sources, the most common sources, across the board that are not only sourced but cited as places referenced. Number one is Reddit.
Yeah.
Also in the top five
And
are
Wikipedia.
those. That's what I was going to say. Like the very thing, those of you who are a lot closer to being in school than I am, or have kids like I do, and what do you always say? Okay, look at your sources, try to get primary sources, but Wikipedia, use a little caution. This is where a lot of our AI information, that's where they're getting the information to predict.
Hmm.
And Instagram and things. So there is some crowdsource. It's great if you want to test sentiment. I think, like, what are people talking about? What is out there? And it's not that it's always wrong. It's that it's wrong often enough, or the context is different. And if you don't yourself know what you're asking for, and you have no way to understand, is it right? Is it off? How do I know? It sounds so authoritative. People are believing it. So I think that was like probably the most important, in my opinion, Allison. Thanks for bringing that up because it's true. If it's wrong, it doesn't do you any good. And God forbid you're basing your decisions, client decisions, whether that's portfolio construction, whether that's other advice to clients, if you're basing that on inaccurate information, you won't be able to say, if question AI made me do it, right? It's just not going to fly. So as part of your fiduciary duty, you really need to know, you know, I have a reason, it's a reasoned ability looking at it. I have a reasonable belief that this information is correct before I then, use it as a basis for advice, recommendations, anything you might do, right? It starts there. And if it's wrong at the get-go, everything later is wrong. Okay, so
Mhm.
I think that's the challenge. That is the main challenge. I mean, the hallucinations we've heard about, that it comes up with crazy things, but bias. I'm really concerned about bias, because not only in the sources of information that it's kind of you know re- re- reviewing, if you will, but also the way we prompt. We don't even know sometimes if we are creating, a different response than what we're intending. And then it magnifies over time if we have this inherent bias that we're just not aware of. And we're basing decisions based on this. And I think as firms start to use this more for portfolio construction, we may see more, because it's going to know. And remember, it's looking for data sometimes to say, what do other firms do? What do other people you don't know who it's looking at. So, that's why we don't, it's not a case where you want to look off our neighbor's paper, if you know what I mean. We need to use it to supplement our unique skill set and knowledge and save us for our highest and best use, not to, shortcut the important things, right? And I think that's how people are having to learn that, and that's not easy. So,
I want to get more into our slides because I know we got a lot of good
oh,
stuff
okay, I'm
coming and I
sorry.
don't want to cut you off. But, it feels like a lifetime ago, but I think it was sometime in November, December, where FINRA and the SEC released their, annual reports, so the SEC exam priorities, and then of course the FINRA regulatory oversight
Mhm.
report. So, um, I was waiting in anticipation because I was so curious, and I knew you were, and several others here at Comply, about how AI was going to show up. And so, it showed up. It didn't show up loud, but
Yeah,
it did. It
yeah,
was in the exam
yeah,
priorities, and it's also so the SEC exam, of course, is a little more vague in their surprise in what they're saying. But I think
right,
it really just gets back to it is that this is anywhere that AI is touching needs to be documented. It needs to be reported,
right,
and you need to know what's
right,
going on. And
right,
so, getting into the FINRA ones, they get a little more specific about Gen AI. And so that's a lot of the stuff
right,
we were talking about. So generative
right,
AI is when you're
right.
using an AI and it's creating a piece of content or an output that you are then going to leverage. And
Mhm.
so, if you've got a marketing team that's AI savvy and they're producing, content materials and blogs and website copy and all that, and it's still going through the regular old, marketing review that you have
Mhm.
set up, great use
Mhm.
case. But if your marketing team's going rogue and there's no use cases and there's
Right,
no defined process, that's problematic. But it's still a little on the safer side because of that
right,
marketing review piece. The
and
part that
right,
keeps me up at night is the research, right?
yeah,
The
right,
what other people can be doing.
yeah,
Because I think, like, even my first experiences with AI, just watching it magically produce something that would have taken me in the past like five
yeah,
hours is like kind
yeah.
of like gives you whiplash a little bit because you're
It
like,
really
this is
is.
incredible, and then you see how much
Right,
easier life is going to become. But then it's
right,
a matter of, and if you're a manager of people, you get this, like, now you got to review the AI work, right? And you're
right,
like,
right,
I wouldn't have done it like this or that. But when it comes to the investment decisions or portfolio
right.
decisions or any of that decision
That's
making, even if that's where it gets
right,
really hairy, and that's
right.
what we're going to get
That's
into
where the
today.
risks definitely increase, right? And so
Yeah.
that's, and understanding humans in the loop. I think people are all worried, about the AI is going to impact jobs. And I think that's true. But maybe it's taking away those functions that, it's designed to do and saving people for this other, like I said, highest and best use and
Yeah.
reviewing
And if
and making you more efficient. So
And
I
if
think
you're
that's,
savvy with AI or become savvier with AI, the cool thing about AI is it can make you savvier while you're using it. You're like, help me do this better. And it's like, oh,
mhm,
okay, let me help you prompt me.
yeah.
But I completely lost my train of thought. But um
It's
I don't
that
even
earth
remember it.
shattering.
I don't know.
It changes everything. That's why it's hard to define. And you were right about the SEC. We thought, maybe hoped to some degree, because this is such a wide open space. There are a lot of people that find comfort in regulation, specific regulation, and we're
Hmm.
hoping. But that's the difference between, well, one of the differences between FINRA and SEC. FINRA is rules based. They're very prescriptive, whereas SEC has always been principles based. So we
Hmm.
thought, when there was a rule proposal that had to do with conflicts of interest and predictive, technologies, that we
Hmm.
thought that was a precursor to rules, right? The SEC seemed to be a little hesitant or cautious. And then last summer, they withdrew the proposal, and it wasn't replaced, at least not to today so far. It hasn't been replaced. And people, I think, were thinking, some of them, firms, saying, oh, good, we don't have to do it, or they're not concerned. And that is not the case. I want to caution people. It is absolutely not the case that the SEC is not interested in this because they didn't issue. All they're doing is saying our existing framework should apply to this. It's principles based, risk based. You should be able to apply what you know to all of these new elements. Now, I do think we need to be aware that the SEC is going to be. That's what the priority set. It's just woven into everything, so you can't really pull out and say AI is a topic. No, it's a topic in every other topic, and you need to expect them to be asking a lot of questions and being prepared for a lot of scrutiny in this area. And they themselves are using it, so their attitude definitely has changed, and they're going to expect us to use it too. So I think it's really important to know.
No, I think it's really important, and I think this is a really good segue because I was talking with someone recently, and they were like, "Oh, there hasn't been, AI enforcement actions," and I was like, "No, no, no, there sure have been AI enforcement
Hmm.
actions,
Absolutely.
and it's technology based, right? So it's like AI equals technology, full stop.
Hmm.
There's no difference between the two, and so these ones just happen to, and I would love for you to walk us through kind of like the highlights
Yeah.
of it. I'm sure everyone on this
Right.
in this webinar can read, but
Right.
what happened here is can be
Yeah.
existing maybe in your firm or a
Ab-
firm in the
Absolutely.
ether. So
Absolutely. And Allison, this is just the precursor to more actions we're going to see on this topic. It just happened to be that this was the first area that was really easy to find. And we have seen cases. AI washing, you may have heard that term. It reminds you, a lot of those of you who remember ESG with greenwashing, when that became
mhm.
kind of popular a few years ago. And I think the problem is, we're always looking to better serve our clients. We're looking for new things. Oh, clients are interested in ESG. Clients are interested in AI. So we try to accommodate them. We want them to know, hey, we're looking out for you. We're trying to advance with the times. But some people go too far. Some firms go too far. And then they start saying, ooh, we better get some buzzwords in our disclosures or on our website. We need people to think we're all this, because that's a great marketing pitch. I'm no marketing expert, but I know you can tell us that is probably number one marketing, I'm guessing,
No,
pitch for them
my
right
my
now.
role is product marketing, and as we, your task force, and here it complies, we develop our own technology and AI enabled
Yeah,
things. We are being very responsible in the
yeah,
way we do it because we
yeah,
deeply believe that it needs to benefit the compliance team. It does not need to
absolutely,
add extra weight on here. But
absolutely.
getting into one of these examples,
Yeah,
so I found
yeah.
this one the other day, and it was interesting to me. This isn't a firm, but Incorporated
Mhm.
basically said that it's got this shopping app that uses AI, and
Yeah,
come to
yeah,
find out, it's not. It's
yeah.
outsourced overseas. And so it was a
Right.
combo, on the right side, you're just going to see the
Hmm.
SEC charges, but
Hmm.
it was DOJ combo ruling. And
Right,
so were hit
right.
with fines as well on the civil side. And
Hmm.
it's kind of one of those things where it's like, it's the line is in the sand. They're looking, they're wanting to figure out,
Well,
like, if you're using AI to power
mhm,
something and really
mhm,
90% of it is offshore,
right,
humans doing the
right.
thing with a little bit of AI
Mm.
assistance, that's misleading the investors that
Absolutely.
you've
And Allison,
gotten.
it's the thing that's, I think, reassuring, or I hope it's reassuring to our listeners, is this is not new. Like if you were
Mm-mm.
to say, these violations, there are three cases. I encourage you to go look at them, involving greenwashing. It's basically misstating or exaggerating what you're doing, how you're doing it. And we've always said, don't use hyperbole, don't exaggerate, because you need to be able to demonstrate you are doing these things. And it's really hard to say we're cutting edge. What does that mean? How do you demonstrate that? But if you're saying we're using this advanced algorithm, number one, how do you define advanced? Number two, if you say, well, that's the intern studying math that is coming and he does some, like, he is not an advanced algorithm. Your
Yeah,
spreadsheet is not an advanced algorithm.
it's
So it's
misleading
fraudulent.
and
It's
fraudulent.
fraudulent. And
So,
so
I
this
mean,
is not new.
right. The
It's not
next
new.
one
We
I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Oh, hold on. Is my mouse not working again? It wasn't working earlier. Okay, so this one is also huge AI washing, right?
yeah, yeah. They're
And
all
so I'm just sorry, it's
it's
so small on my screen.
that's okay. And it's the same concept. I mean, the facts are a bit different, but it's about, um, if you're holding something out, whether it's specifically said or you're implying you're doing something in a certain way for clients, clients rely on it. And if you can't demonstrate that, or if something, goes wrong in that process, you can't hold that out. It is promissory. It is a violation of anti-fraud provisions. And of course, they're going to find these. These are easier to find too than some of the other AI issues because, marketing has long been a scrutinized thing. So I think it's definitely important, but you can see it's got to match. If you can't do it, if you don't do it the way you're saying you are, don't pass go. You can't do this. And advisors should be used to this. You couldn't say it, even if it didn't involve AI. If it involved, hey, we use, an abacus to do all the work. Like if you're not, you're still fraudulent, right? It's still
Right,
misleading.
right.
And I think people are getting excited because they want to meet clients where they are and say they're using AI without maybe understanding the definitions, or, some skeptically might be just saying, hey, let's get it in there so we can, talk to clients who are interested. So
Yeah.
I there's a lot of similarities.
And I'm like, okay, well, do you, it's like, it's a mixed bag. It's like I'm getting pressure, or it's like I'm really interested, but we're gonna have
Yeah,
to augment everything.
right,
But
right.
this last one is also,
Mhm.
very similar with the misleading AI
Yeah,
investment claims. But I
yeah.
think the TLDR on all of it is
Mhm.
that, you need to do what you said you did and
Absolutely.
have
And
proof behind
again,
it.
doesn't change. As AI continues to change and evolve and technology grows, this will still be here. You can't mislead
Yeah.
people. You can't commit fraud.
Yeah. So, if you're getting pressure from someone to AI wash something that you guys are doing, here are three great examples of how that's going to land you in hot water. So, this is going to lead me into
Yeah.
my next prompt because the next section is going to be super fun. On a scale of 1 to 5, just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can elaborate if you'd like. How would you rate your knowledge of AI? So, about in January of last year, we had an AI consultant come in for the marketing team to help us understand the changes it would make to the way people search, right? We need to appear in, AI search or whatever it may be. And I think we all ranked ourselves very high. And then after the session, we were like, we're more like a 2, a 3. But since then, we've worked with that consultant and we've gotten really up to speed. But, I think some of the biggest things that I'm going to get into here is just like level setting of understanding AI in general. And so last year, we ran a survey, which we are rerunning again this summer. This one's going to be way more focused on AI. So look forward to sharing that with the group and in broader groups. But, we asked a bunch of CCOs, what are the, use cases that you're using for AI? And of course, risk scoring and alerts, document summarization, and marketing communications review ranked among the top. So going back to that entire like developing AI for things that are really going to free up your time and let you have that human expertise level of supervisory control is really, really great. And it's great to hear that firms, this was done, I want to say like 9 months ago data, are that actively using it there. So, of course, with new technology comes the risks. And so none of these should be a surprise to anyone. They probably, probably have an uneasy feeling, at least one or two of them. But, the 57% showing up saying regulatory expectations and disclosures, like Amber, what's the question they're going to ask? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds, even from just picking up on what you've been saying, it's that they're going to ask about AI within all of the questions. So how is AI showing up in
Right.
this versus like,
Right.
let's now turn to AI, right? Which
Right.
is
Which is why you have to
something
know what people are doing. And,
exactly.
you also have to understand if AI is embedded in any of the products your vendors use, because I
Yeah.
don't think some people understand that. And that's
Yeah.
hard, but it's a whole different ballgame. So that's a really, you know, good, that's a good, identification of risk.
Absolutely. And then you get into data privacy and security. And that's the one where it's like, if you've got people at your firm going into the free version of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or
Mhm.
Perplexity or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
and they're just doing their own thing in there, like all of that is fair game
Yeah.
open. I
Right.
was actually like thinking to myself, how many people who have gotten like job offers and contracts that they've uploaded to like the
Right.
open AI, like just
Right.
because they're not even an
Right.
employee yet. Like there's probably so much information, personal information
Right.
going into these systems
Oh, I'm
recklessly
sure.
and innocently because it's like, oh, I'm just using it for that, but you just don't
Right.
know like the
And
source of something like that or a data
absolutely.
breach.
And we should
And
say
it's
this, and I know you're going there, and everybody might already know this, but our client data, that is such an important thing. Yes,
mhm,
you'll tell us, I know about a closed system, versus open, and don't put PII or MPI in these, but also
right.
understand no matter what you're doing for proprietary information, anything, are the tools using what information you're providing or it has access to if you've set it up to link to something else? Are they using
Mhm.
that for training purposes? Because if they are, it's who knows how far this information
Yeah, what is
will
the definition of training purposes? Like
yeah,
how? Like
right.
that's a big old check or
Absolutely.
not check mark, question mark.
Absolutely. And it's not just
This,
what like your prompts or information you upload. Some of the tools, as we progress, will connect with other tools. So it might overlay your email system. So now we're talking about, our meeting summaries and transcriptions, what's said there, where is it going, who's, other third parties, are they going to give it to those parties? This is a really scary area, and it ties into Reg SP. I know everyone's
mhm.
aware of Reg SP and being really sure what is it, the breach on the vendor side. Are they telling you? Because now you have a lot more vendors to scrutinize and be aware of, and the risks are real there.
Agreed. And the last three or the last one and then the other two, like the model trainability and explainability is what truly keeps me up at night if regulatory compliance were to keep me up at night. But it really genuinely is like putting your faith in the hands of a vendor that's going to say this is how it works and that's the
Yeah,
definitive thing. And I think
yeah.
like just looking at the people who choose this profession and all of us at work in a professional level, like I really do feel like I need to understand the output to stand
Hmm.
behind it. And so
Hmm.
if you're starting to get that gut feeling that the vendor you're using for AI, whether it's, a point solution in regulatory compliance or broader,
Yeah,
implementation across the firm, like
yeah.
you need to feel like you can testify in front of Congress about it
You have to
almost. Like it
explain
just
how it works.
is those things.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to get to. And I think the last two and
Yeah,
then this slide
yeah.
actually perfectly cover it for the
Right,
next thing. It's the lack of
right.
internal expertise and the cultural resistance, I think, are in a lot of ways intertwined, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I've done the social media, I've done the
yeah.
transition to Zoom, I've done all these things. Like I enough already. I don't want any more tech.
Hmm.
But this is the slide that gives me heartburn, right? And so in this poll, we had, I think it was 67% of firms were using AI, and then another 20 something were about to start leveraging it back when the
Hmm.
data was done. But only 49% have a formal
Hmm.
AI policy governance
Yeah,
structure in place. And of course,
right.
like at what point are you gonna be like, oh, let's completely overhaul this now that we have
Right.
this
Especially
technology
since
doing
they
me,
don't
no
even
take.
know they're being used, right? You're not going to have
Yes.
a policy
So,
if you don't even
so
know people are
this
using it.
is like where it all boils down to is how are you
Hmm.
using AI? Have you
Right.
defined it? What are the acceptable use cases? Where does regulatory compliance sit in that procurement
Absolutely.
group? Because if you are
Right.
not in the procurement group, anytime AI or machine learning or
Right.
anything really touches
Right.
the business, you need to be, and you can
Right.
send them those three examples of
Yeah.
enforcement actions.
Right.
But it's scary
But
because and I remember this early in my career. I was doing public relations and social media, and this was like 16, 17 years ago. And I had to write a social media policy for the company because they didn't have one. And they were like, we don't really know it. So can you write it and we'll just let you know if it's acceptable legally? And I'm like, okay. But that was kind of one of the ways the business is handled, people being like online and still a representation of the company, right? Like you can't act a foul on the internet and expect to, you know, come into work the next day. Vice versa, you can't be promoting our stuff in a way that's not approved by the company as well. And so that kind
right.
of shifted things, and it reminds me a little bit about that. And then I think the
Yeah.
marketing followed social media pretty quickly after, as
Yeah.
all that kind of devolved, right?
Right. You
Um,
need to tell people what they can and can't do, which tools they can and can't use, how are they using it, how are they documenting it, who's reviewing it, all these things. But it's not different in principle from what you need to do before. On any other, business, this is how we design policies and procedures. And when you update, and you should, your policies and procedures, don't be surprised if you're having to update many, if not most, sections in your manuals
mhm.
to
Would you say
incorporate
that
this.
people should update the sections, or do you think that people need to do an AI policy and update sections?
Well, it's easy for me to say because unless I'm doing it for a client, I
You're
don't
not
have to
doing
do
it.
it. But I would, I'm risk averse. So I would say both. And the reason I say this is because it would be hard in a standalone policy to cover all of the little nuances that are going to be important in every single use case.
Yeah.
And I always advocate when creating policies and procedures for the those closest to it, those actually doing it, to be involved in the process. So I like marketing people involved when we build marketing related policies and procedures because they're the ones doing it. We need to make sure it reflects that, and they will, kind of buy in and help us evolve
Mhm.
over time. You can't do that with an AI only. You need to get people that are closest to it and really tell you how it's changing, how their use is changing. And so that's where I kind of loop back to an AI audit before because it's really hard when it's you. And tools. One of the things that, we're starting to see, not only, us, and I think we'll see more of is how do we use AI and the power of AI to make life easier for our clients, right? From a product standpoint too. It reminds me a lot of when cybersecurity became a big issue and people were getting vendors. And I was talking to clients saying, they don't understand what we do. This is, can we find a vendor that specializes in our space? That's one of the challenges I'm seeing with I think use of vendors. It's great if you find vendors who understand the industry, have some expertise in the industry, because think about the data sets they're trained on. Think about like it won't understand industry jargon. There's some rules that I think a tool that is specific that has a lot of use in our industry, it will benefit you greatly. So I wanted to say that because I think about people kind of using all of these random tools without governance. It's much easier if you are careful and judicious in how you select your tools, the credibility of those tools, not say you don't need to review, but you really need to, that'll shortcut your effort a little bit to know who you're working with, what their history and data set they're trained on. So I think that's just my 2 cents because it's really hard when you're dealing with a tool that really doesn't have a lot of industry,
It's the
air quotes
first thing I
knowledge.
ask when anyone, approaches me. I was speaking at an event recently, and a bunch of people came up afterwards with very specific
Yeah,
questions about Form ADV and policies and procedures.
yeah,
And like the first question I asked when anyone, like we had a client reach out about our AI roadmap, and I was like, what's your governance look like? Like, we want to know first what your governance
Yeah.
looks like, what your audit looks
Yeah.
like, how a full audit of every
Right.
AI use
Right.
case you guys have
Right.
existing that you don't know. I think it gets, looking at this slide now of just the misconceptions, like I want to kind of focus there for a minute because, the AI chat tools are, you downloading the app for ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it may be, and chatting in the free space, right? Or you could have one walled off, like we have the enterprise OpenAI contract, where all of our data, everything that we have use cases for it, we have use cases for pulling any sort of information in there. There's certain things that are completely walled off, but we know it's a safe and protected environment. Our IT team went through it and all of that stuff. So that's like the AI chat. And that's why Amber's talking a lot about prompt engineering. And I can follow up with some supplemental material on this because it's really important how you craft your prompt. It's also cool because you can tell, like you can word vomit to the AI that you want them to help you with the prompt, and then they will turn that into a prompt that then you didn't prompt them with, and then you get the output you want, which is kind of hysterical because you're learning as you're going, which is personally my favorite part about AI. But then we get into the custom GPTs. So these are, my example earlier is a custom GPT. So we have this regulatory fact checker, and in its information, I'm like, you're a former SEC regulator, you're a former FINRA regulator, FCA compliance, like any regulatory regimes that Comply specializes in. And, I've got, the different data points. I'm telling it to look up things on the sec.gov website, the FINRA website, like it needs to be these sources. That one is great because you've got it pointed, you've got it focused on the task it needs to do versus like just the chat where you're saying to the broad AI gods do this thing out of context. It's narrowed down even more. And so one of the things that Comply is about to release is a Comply AI policy guide. And so it's that custom walled off enterprise, solution that would allow our clients, many of you on the call, who get the most common questions over and over and over again. What's my gift limit? What's my this limit? What's the policy for this or that? Now your employees would be able to engage with that chat and then say, I want to go to, the open with a client. What's the rules around that, or whatever it may be, to then reduce the time that your team has. Because we hear it all the time, like we are the help desk for policy questions and we can't take it anymore. So we hear you, and that's one of the things we've been developing. The agentic AI piece is, in my personal opinion, I have not seen show up a lot in compliance yet, which is when you have an AI agent, not a chatbot, but a mechanism with workflows that perform a task. So that would be like, hey, I need you to go into the Comply platform and pre-clear a trade for me. And you'd be typing it into the chatbot and it would take care of that for you. I have not personally seen that in the compliance
No,
space.
but I think it's coming. I think it's coming. And I think it might be also something like we were talking about before, the vendors. Make sure you understand how these vendors work, because I think we'll find some of that embedded there already.
Yeah. So, back to like not trying to spill over secrets on this, but, Amber and I obviously are with this AI task force, and, we sit with product a lot. And so, anything we develop will have that regulatory backbone because that's, we have the regulatory expertise here. But if you are working with a vendor who doesn't have regulatory expertise, or a team of former regulators on staff, it might get a little more dicey with that whole explainability.
And we've tested that, Allison. You and I were talking about that. We've tested just, for fun, because I guess that's fun for people like us, but
it's a blast.
you get a widely varying, and you can tell it doesn't a lot of times understand the context despite whatever prompt you use. So it's why it's so important to have, this credible source to go to.
All right. The one thing I want to touch on before we get into the real heart of this conversation, and I want to be mindful of time as well, is black box AI. And so you might see this term out in the wild. It is what model transparency and explainability. It's the other word for that. So, if you're talking to a vendor, if you're talking to anyone, if you're talking to a person on some department that's bought some AI tool, and now it's your mess to kind of figure out with regards to the policies and how the use cases, like if they cannot tell you exactly how it's done, then you have a
Right.
situation on your hands that needs to be escalated with that vendor.
And
Because
this is what
when
the SEC will ask you.
this
I
is
mean,
what
I
they're looking
think
for, what they want to figure
absolutely.
out. Because they have control, let's think about it, over, the firms, right? And they have control over this, but they know more than anyone that AI washing is happening. And so they want to make sure
Right.
that it's
And
being
for any
regulated.
use, and like, I think you need to understand not only what tools you're using for what purposes, and then you need to be tested, whether it's an AI audit, whether it's internally. Try to explain, how does it work? What is that result based on? Whatever form you're using, whatever task you apply it to, whatever output you expect, you need to be able to explain. And it's hard. And that's why we're calling it a black box, because it's like, well, it takes some stuff and voila, it comes out with this. If
Yeah.
you can't see where that came from, this is why testing is going to be a huge thing with this, to be able to test the output. Is it what you would have expected? Is there a flaw? Is it a bit, is there bias? But also vendors, we're going to be in this space where a lot of vendors can't explain it. And if they can't explain it to you, you can't explain it to the SEC, which is why when you do your vendor due diligence, which is going to have to be more robust than ever, it's really key that you understand how they're using it, where they're pulling this. If you're using it for compliance, for flagging, problematic or high risk transactions, whatever use it is, if you can explain what it's looking at, what data it's referring to, what are the criteria for flagging, whatever it is. And this is true whether it's marketing or compliance or trading, any research, anything, and any, level of AI use or model, you need to know it. And if you can't explain it, that's a sign that you need to go back and do some more homework, understand it better, talk to your people if they're using it now, because really, ideally, you won't use it until you can explain it. And if you're working with a vendor that won't be transparent and tell you kind of what it's about, what it's doing, I'm not saying give away the secret sauce. I'm saying give you enough information to understand, then it may not be your most credible choice.
Good point though, Amber, because they're not, the vendor might not say, "Oh, we're not going to tell you our proprietary thing." They might
Mhm.
make it seem like they don't have to tell you, right? Like we're not
Right,
a regulated
right,
services provider, so
right.
it's how you use the
Yep,
technology and what you do. That's something that software first vendors will often hang their hat on with liability, so to speak. And this is a room full of compliance
right,
and risk people, so we can talk about
right.
liability pretty freely, but that is, and I'm not calling out anyone specifically, but that is
Yeah,
an
yeah,
easy way to say it. Like if I'm a lawyer, and
right,
you use it at your own risk
right,
at the end of the day,
right.
is some of the
And
things that I've.
right, and I am a lawyer, and I see it in legal applications, similar issues. And again, I think nobody, maybe you don't want to dig deep enough to be able to explain it because you're not a techie person, maybe you're not interested in AI, but you need to know enough to feel comfortable and be able to have a reasonable
Mhm.
explanation. You don't need to know everything about the firm. We're not talking about trade, secrets here. We're talking about enough to have an idea of what's happening and be able to put that into words. And if you are getting, kind of a runaround from a firm who doesn't understand why you need to know, that's a sign. They don't maybe have to tell you, but you don't have to work with that vendor either. So there should be a meeting of the minds there where, they understand what you need. And that's why I was saying before that vendors that specialize in our industry, right, are going to be more likely to get in front of that and understand you're going to need the answers to some questions.
All right, let's get into the QA section. So, one more, I should have said this earlier, but there's another chat prompt. So, if you haven't already, let us know some of the stuff that you guys are thinking about of having policies and procedures in place and things of that nature. But
Yeah.
I mean, let's just jump right into it, Amber. What
Yeah.
do
These are questions.
adequate AI policies and procedures look
Yeah,
like?
yeah.
Like, tell
These are
us what it
questions we're getting all the time, right? And so, we're going to talk high level. Some of this we've already covered, actually.
Yep.
We're looking at adequate, right? Your implementation must be effective, but you got to start somewhere. So you need to understand what you're doing. Who's doing it? How are they doing it? Put some guardrails around it. But this idea of an AI tool inventory, you're going to be asked for this. What tools are you using, including embedded? Start there. Have these conversations. And when you work down through your policies and procedures, you'll find out from the policy level, what do we allow? Not only tools, but use cases. How do we want you to use it? You're going to put that in. And again, we talked about having maybe a standalone with kind of an overarching description, but also, in specific sections. And that's going to vary from firm to firm because every firm is going to use AI differently. And we all know that you need to customize policies and procedures. We can't use generic. We never were supposed to be able to, but now I think we're going to see more differentiation between firms because of this technology and the capabilities. So it's more important than ever. Work with an expert in this area, do it yourself, whatever you do, just make sure that you build in how do you do it? What are you using? How are you retaining it? Who's reviewing it? Right. And that includes testing and validation. Whatever use, every use case is different, but if you're using it for something, you're relying on output, what are you going to, if you're questioned, you got to be able to explain it, but you got to be able to show that you had a reasonable belief that it's giving you the correct data and that you're using whatever data that might be research, that might be portfolio construction, whatever it is. How did you reach a level of confidence that the information is correct? So you're going to have to create testing protocols. That's a little difficult sometimes when you don't maybe know enough or you're using a black box tool. So it's really important to match up the tool, the use, and really sit there and think. And you may need help with this to find out, how can I test this? I know one of the things I do a lot or recommend a lot is, creates a scenario or situation that the outcome, what it should be or what you'd like to see, and then, run it through. And again, I'm talking broadly because everyone's using different tools in different ways. But if the output is not what you would have expected, it's something you need to go back and look at. If you have two similar situations, for example, and you get different output, it's important also to remember that, especially if we're talking about that first level of AI that Alison was talking about, I highly encourage you to keep track of, which AI tool you're using, which version you're using, what date you're looking at, because as those of you who've been in the space and playing around maybe with it know, the answer, given the same prompts and the same tool, the answer you will get may be different a month later, because in the meantime, it's learning, right? It's
Right.
being exposed to more things. So you need to know
like
what
software
that
as a
is.
service. So it's
Yeah,
updating without you even,
yeah,
we're
you
not
don't even
reading
know.
the release notes on everything. Like
Right,
we love product, we love release notes, we appreciate them, but we are not like every single time a change is being made to a software system,
right,
across all of that.
right.
And so, this whole thing, the next question I have, hopefully it doesn't skip to two because I clicked it twice, but the regulatory risk of AI use. But even when you were talking through the policies, I'm sure it is very tempting to use AI to write your policies or edit your
Um,
policies. And,
it's very,
I was chatting with one of our consultants and they had mentioned, sweetly, that they had received, some Reg SP ChatGPT output to review
mhm,
from a client. And so we're kind of at this stage of like,
yeah,
yes, that's super helpful, but what is the risk if you're using AI to develop your policies? And then just basic, I
yeah,
think we've talked a lot about the regulatory risks. I
yeah,
mean, like nothing's
absolutely.
worse than a fine and public embarrassment, right?
Well, right. Or a
Um,
fiduciary duty. Like most firms are
right.
well-meaning, but if you
Yes.
can't say there's a legal concept, scienter, the intention to do something bad for. When we're talking about anti-fraud, you don't need an intention to do something wrong. It's that you didn't do what would have been reasonable under the circumstance to find out
Right.
that this information is not right, that you should have tested, you should have kicked the tires more, you should have had somebody else look at it. Policies and procedures, I've seen these. Clients have sent me things. And remember, like we've done anecdotal examples where it doesn't have all the right information, especially general tools that are not necessarily well trained on the nuance of policies and procedures. And I've seen many versions that don't have key points. The problem is, unless you're a person that lives and breathes compliance, you may not recognize it. What it does provide might seem credible, and it's definitely authoritative, and they can give you a chart and a checklist too. But that doesn't mean it includes everything, and you may not recognize that it doesn't without somebody looking at that. And that's why, again, I encourage people to, if you're going to rely on tools that that are created by people in the space, or at least vetted and designed by people, whether that's through automation or an individual person, because it really is scary because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, it's that, and like having an AI savvy expert in the loop, and maybe AI savvy looks like a level 1 right now, and then it's
Yeah,
level 2
yeah,
and 6 months from now. Like, don't imposter syndrome yourself into not thinking that you can tackle all of this and understand all of it.
right.
But I think like it is just so vital to have a seat at that
Yeah,
table with procurement to understand what's going
absolutely,
on across the business with all this
absolutely.
technology. I talk about this all the time. Not that everyone on this webinar has heard me talk about this at all, but there was a venture capital company a couple months ago that, which what story I'm talking about because I talk about it all the time. But they had a meeting with the startup, and meeting ended. They shared some not so maybe disparaging things about that startup. Then they went on to talk about other companies, and the meeting wrapped. They said their goodbyes, and then off went the transcript to the startup, not
Yeah,
realizing that the IT department had the meeting note taker set to just send it,
absolutely,
which
absolutely.
in a normal vanilla call would have
Yeah,
been like, eep, this is bad. Like, we don't have this in our
yep.
policies and procedures. We don't know what this is about. Like, when did this start? But then
Hmm.
to be got breaking like 6 rules at once and then emailing the transcript, that's now books and
Right.
records.
Well,
I'm literally on the hook for
absolutely. And
MNPI for being
right.
rude.
Right.
and,
And
all these things.
how many times do people historically chat amongst themselves before people join? You know,
Yes.
I'm seeing that example of, it's like you might be talking about something like harmless, but
Yeah,
now it's going to be part of the record. And I'm glad you brought this up, because that, I think, is one of the most frequently asked questions about what do I
it
need to
is.
keep, about the chat, the
Meeting
meeting.
rules.
And again, you need to know the tools. Some, just kind of transcribe or try to what you said. Some
Mhm.
summarize. Some provide, an analysis or something, and they all store it differently. You need to understand, what does it store? Some have voice. Some have just, their own created transcript. Um, do they use that to train? Because again, we don't want confidential things in here if we can avoid it, but you're talking to clients. Clients are not going to say, well, I need to really talk to you about my issues, but I can't say it because I'm on this AI. Like, it's going to happen. So you want to be really sure it's in a secure environment. And then, yes, there is going to be, a summary, a transcript, or whatever, and you need to review that. So ideally, someone that's in that meeting, because I know, even from personal experience, Alice, that I've done things and I'm like, that's not what I said. Sometimes it's a it doesn't know whether Allison said it or Amber.
Phonetically doing this
It's
transcript.
it's
So if
not
it's
thinking.
a bizarre word, they're not
It's
going to catch it. Or if it's, like
right.
was raised in Texas, so instead of saying pen, I say pin,
Yeah,
like you
right.
write with, and like
And
those sorts of
yes,
things, it's not necessarily picking up on. So it's like a couple of
but
things. It's like,
industry
one,
jargon too. It doesn't
yeah, if
always
you're
know what we mean.
right. And if
Hmm.
it's like, if this is turned on for you and you want to use it, wonderful. Let's get someone
Yeah,
in to review the transcript and meeting notes
right,
and be real about it and
right,
not send off something
right.
that looks bad. 100%. But if
Absolutely.
you're sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, are we sending meeting transcripts around?
Right,
You need to talk
right.
to whoever manages
And
that, because it's
and
really, really important. Because
it's
once
really
it's emailed,
important. And
yeah.
it's not just, that's true for written communication, which is an important part of 2042.
Mhm.
But we also have things. It may not be transmitted to a client. It may be transmitted to you from the vendor. It may, you don't know where it lives, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are going to put it, be able to access it later and use that as the basis, say the client is talking about, updates to their personal situations, their risks, objectives, all of these things that you're then going to be using to create advice, portfolio changes, something. Again, if this is wrong, you're transcripting. You're not going back and looking at this. And I'd have had it say the complete opposite thing or emphasize one piece, that you said spend a minute talking about in an hour something else. The bias is there. If you then use that as a basis for recommendations, it's passed off to other people, or people look back at those notes, or God forbid, you have a regulatory or litigation request. So then you're going to pull this up later and it says, oh, well, your own meeting, it said this. And you're like, we wouldn't say that. I didn't say it. Well, you saved it. You had the chance to review it. You should have, because it's discoverable. It's going to come back up. And then it might magnify all the problems when you keep using it to provide additional advice and guidance in different ways. So it's tremendously important that you review. And yes, if it's being distributed, that's a whole different concern. Absolutely. And we see a lot of errors there. We see them, mixing up things. Client A with accounts belonging to client B. There's all sorts of problems. The technology will get better. I believe that, Allison, but for now, it's us. We are on the line. It is our duty. You cannot blame a vendor. You cannot blame, it told me to do it. It did. It's you. So be really.
It's a liability thing.
Absolutely.
I could talk to you about this for about 5 more
I
hours. We both
know.
know
I
that. But I
know.
want to be mindful of time, and I want to touch on just 2 more questions I think that we haven't already covered. This one we've kind of touched on because you brought up Reg SP, you brought up cybersecurity. Anything else that you want to touch on with AI as it relates to these kind of business continuity, cyber kind of technical things about the compliance program?
It's similar to what we should already be doing. It just puts a new spin on it because of AI vendors. So not only are vendor management issues, which we've talked about, you're looking at different things because it's AI. But with our business continuity planning, if you're relying on this, if it's a crucial part of your business, what happens? That should be in your business continuity plan. It should be, probably in your risk assessment. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if they go out of business? What happens if they are subject to breach? They're hacked. So you need to be mindful of, the more you rely on any tool, the more you could be at risk in terms of, continuing to provide the services that you're contracted to provide for your clients, in addition to inconveniencing yourself and losing some of that efficiency that we're using AI for in the first place. So make sure, if you're relying on tools, yes, the contract should specify certain things. You should review that. You should kick the tires. You should, be all over that from the due diligence perspective. But you really need to think worst case scenario. The more you rely on them, what are you going to do? If you're letting them store your books and records, what are you going to do if they go out of business? Do you know? Does your contract cover that? Because if you can't access those, it's the same as not having any records. So, I think it's not in principle different from what we're supposed to do already. It just puts a new spin because we're going to have probably a lot more records, maybe more vendors. So it just magnifies that concern. And we do know that the SEC, this is one of the things that they've always been looking at, but in the context of AI, they're really going to dig deep. So I think it's really important that people, update that in addition to everything else, understand how they work. How can you create this if you don't understand what the risk is, right?
I don't want to drag this on longer because I know we're at time, but the whole, but I will. But mentioning the record, it's like if you have records with multiple that's expensive to get out as well,
Yeah,
right? To get those records out if something
right,
does change in that relationship. So that's
right.
another factor that I'm sure everyone's aware of.
It's
But
huge.
if you're not, like, once your business communications are archived with the vendor, you
Yeah,
have to hold on to those records for what, 5 years, I believe,
right,
or five,
right.
I think,
Right. And
five
it's
total.
not just those records. Remember, we talked about 2042, those things specified there, but anything in
Right.
your policies and procedures, it's a lot of your research, the underpinnings for any recommendation made or proposed to be made, advice
Mm-hmm.
made or proposed to make. So that is a lot. So you're theoretically talking similar to what we do with email now. I've seen maybe one firm in my whole career that went through manually and decided, oh, I need to keep this email. No, I don't. It doesn't meet the requirement. That's inefficient. It's ridiculous for firms of any size. So what do? We archive everything, right? Because the risk of not having it when we need it,
Right.
look at those off-channel communications cases in the last couple of years. The violations were because they didn't have books and records. They didn't archive. So now
Right.
we have many tools potentially, and you need to know what they're using and what that output is, because if you need to look back and say, this is why we made this recommendation, this is why we advised this, if that's the reason, you're going to have to archive that somehow. And if you have a million tools, it's going to be harder. So the more you can get, and again, a reliable, a reliable firm that is going to be there tomorrow, is not going to go out of business, it understands the concept, right? It understands why this is important, why you need to keep these records, which is one of the things I think that vendors in our space, rather than just general providers, really are more in tune with.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And, I feel like we could have three parts to this webinar. So I'm
Let's
really
do that.
excited to
I love
check
that.
out, let's do it. Don't
Absolutely.
stop us from having a good time. But I cannot wait to check in with the chat. I'm so excited to see the answers.
Yeah.
Thank you for everyone participating in it.
Thank you for
I
asking.
would be shocked if there aren't a bunch of questions, Amber, for me to sync with you after this.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
overall, just thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone for
Thank
being
you.
here, our clients, our prospects, everyone in the industry that's really interested in this. I think it's just a hot topic and a very big nut to crack with regards to things. So hopefully you leave here equal parts more informed and ready to make some changes within your business. And we're around if you have questions. I've put my email address up there. We're going to follow up with the recording of today's session. If anyone who has a question, our team will get back to you. Give us a little bit of time. We are regulatory experts, so we like to give you the best answer possible. And often that means pinging someone that is an expert in that area. And so we'll get back to you shortly. But Amber, thank you.
Thank
And
you,
thank you,
Elsie.
everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.